Welcome to Parachinar, a hidden gem tucked away in the lap of the 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐿 Mountains. This isn't just a place, it's a treasure chest of history, culture, and tales of resilience. Today we are diving deep into the heart of Parachinar and the greater Kurram Agency, a region that has seen the rise and fall of empires, the clash of ideologies, and the everyday beauty of human spirit. So, where are we exactly? The Kurram Agency, now part of Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, lies snugly along the Afghan border. Parachinar, its capital, is the westernmost point of Pakistan, almost kissing Afghanistan's Paktia province. Imagine a valley surrounded by towering mountains, acting as both a natural fortress and a cultural bridge. This bustling bazaar isn't just a marketplace, it's a meeting point of civilizations. For centuries, Kurram has been a crossroads for traders, travelers, and invaders alike. From the mighty armies of Alexander the Great to the nomadic caravans of the Silk Road, this land has seen it all. And let me tell you, every stone here has a story to tell. Kurram's history is like a patchwork quilt. Every piece is stitched with tales of power, culture, and sometimes conflict. The British recognized its strategic importance and annexed it in the late 19th century. They set up their frontier garrisons here, making Parachinar a key outpost in the great game between British India and Tsarist Russia. But what makes Kurram truly unique is its people. The valley is an embroidery of tribes, Pashtuns of varying backgrounds with deep-rooted traditions of hospitality, courage, and yes, sometimes rivalry. It's a region where tribal leaders settle disputes over steaming cups of green tea and poetry flows as freely as the mountain streams. Yet Kurram isn't without its scars. The very diversity that makes it beautiful has also fueled conflicts. Sectarian tensions, land disputes, and the aftermath of geopolitics have often cast long shadows over its breathtaking landscape. Parachinar, in particular, has been a front line in these struggles, enduring decades of strife. But here is the thing. Kurram is more than its conflicts. It's the laughter of children playing in the alleys of Parachinar. It's the aroma of Kabuli pulao wafting from a village kitchen. It's the resilience of its people who, despite everything, wake up every day and carry on. There's a lesson in that for all of us, don't you think? Parachinar and Kurram are not just places on a map. They are living, breathing stories. Stories of endurance, hope, and an unbreakable connection to the land. As we explore these hills and valleys in this video, let's remember, behind every conflict lies a community, and within every challenge lies the seed of resilience. The 1980s, a decade of revolutions, wars, and seismic shifts that would redraw the map of geopolitics. But what does that have to do with a valley nestled in the 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐿 Mountains away from the world? A lot, actually. The Afghan Jihad and the Iranian Revolution turned Kurram Agency, especially Parachinar, into a battleground for forces far beyond its borders. Much like the rest of Pakistan, but a lot more gravely and intensely. Kurram has always been a land of its own rhythm, its people connected to their tribal roots and the rugged mountains that cradled them. But when the Afghan Jihad began in 1979, this valley became more than just a home for its people. It became a chessboard where regional powers played their game, and the pieces Well, they were often the people of Kurram. Kurram sits right at the edge of Afghanistan's Paktia province, as we said. So when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, this border region became a conduit for Mujahideen fighters, weapons, and supplies. Sounds like a strategic jackpot, right? But with that strategic importance came chaos. The Afghan Jihad brought not just fighters but ideologies. Tribal loyalties and old rivalries were certainly overshadowed by new foreign influences. Sunni militants poured into the region, often backed by funding from Gulf countries promoting their version of Islam. And this is where it starts to get messy. Meanwhile, in 1979, something else was brewing not too far away in Iran. The Iranian Revolution, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, sent ripples across the Shia world. For the Shia population of Parachinar, this was more than just news. It was inspiration. Khomeini's call for Shia empowerment resonated deeply, and for many, it was a moment of awakening. Now imagine this. You are a farmer in Parachinar in the 1980s. Suddenly, your valley is flooded with armed men talking about a global jihad. At the same time, your religious leaders are echoing calls for solidarity with Shia movements. What does that mean for you, for your tribe, for your land? It was like fire and oil came together. The tensions were always there, but now everyone had weapons and everyone had a cause. And so, the old land disputes and sectarian tensions of Kurram didn't just escalate, they exploded. Parachinar, with its majority Shia population, became a flashpoint. Sunni tribes, emboldened by the support of the Afghan Mujahideen and their backers, began pushing for dominance, and the Shia tribe, they pushed back, often inspired and supported by Iran. The result: lives torn apart, villages burned, families displaced. Kurram became a microcosm of the larger sectarian divide tearing through the region. And the worst part? The people caught in the middle had little to do with the grand ideological battles being fought over their heads. But here's the thing: Kurram wasn't just a victim of these events. It was a pawn in a much larger game. The Afghan Jihad and the Iranian Revolution brought global forces to this valley, but they also weaponized identities that had coexisted for centuries. Suddenly, being Shia or Sunni wasn't just a matter of faith, it was a matter of survival. So the 1980s were a turning point for Kurram and Parachinar. A beautiful valley was transformed into a front line in a conflict it never asked for. But this is just the beginning of our journey. Let's explore how these tensions shaped the decades that followed and the resilience of the people who refused to let their land be defined by violence. Land is not just soil and stone, it's history, identity, and sometimes heartbreak. In Kurram Agency, where every inch of earth has a story, land disputes are not just property issues. They are battles over belonging, over pride, and sometimes over survival. So today, let's unpack what this land dispute is really about and why it has shaped the lives of the people here for generations. Look at this land. It is beautiful, isn't it? Fertile fields that could feed families, pastures where livestock roam, and valleys that hold the memories of those who have walked them for centuries. But here is the thing: beauty breeds desire. And in Kurram, that desire has often turned into conflict. The roots of Kurram's land disputes stretch back centuries, tied to its unique geography and tribal traditions. The valley is home to Pashtun tribes divided between Shia and Sunni communities, each with their own territories and grazing lands. For the longest time, these lands were governed by tribal customs. Elders settled disputes and everyone knew their place. Well, most of the time at least. So what changed? For one, the British came in the late 19th century and drew their famous borders, lines on a map, they said. But to the people of Kurram, these lines weren't just marks on paper. They sliced through grazing lands, separated tribes, and started a legacy of disputes. They made decisions without asking local people. One tribe's pasture became another's property. Suddenly, brothers were fighting over land that had always been shared. But the real flashpoint comes when you add religion into the mix. Kurram is unique in its Shia majority among all the Pashtun areas, especially in Parachinar, surrounded by Sunni tribes. Over time, dispute over land between these communities became about more than just boundaries. They became battles of identity, faith, and power. Here is how it usually goes. A Shia family claims a piece of farmland, but a Sunni tribe contests it, saying it's part of their ancestral grazing land. Or vice versa. Tempers flare, shots are fired, and before you know it, a small disagreement turns into a full-blown tribal conflict. And remember, this is a place where tribal honor is everything. Once a fight begins, it's not just about land anymore. And now, throw in the Afghan jihad of the 1980s and the Iranian Revolution, and the land disputes become even more explosive. External forces weaponize these conflicts, arming tribes, funding factions, and turning local disputes into proxy battles for global powers. What was once a fight over a pasture became a fight over ideology, identity, and survival. And it's not just big tribal clashes. These disputes trickle down to the everyday lives of people. Imagine you are a farmer working the same land your grandfather worked. One day, a neighbor disputes your boundary. You go to the tribal elders, but their decision doesn't sit well with the other side. Suddenly, your land is at the center of a feud that is bigger, much bigger than you. People have had to leave their fields at times. The fighting doesn't stop, and you can't harvest crops when there's a gun pointed at you. Over the years, the Pakistan's government and military have tried to intervene. They have set up commissions, sent in troops, and even redrawn boundaries. But the land disputes in Kurram aren't just legal issues. They are deeply tied to the people's sense of identity and history, and that makes them incredibly hard to resolve. So at its core, the land dispute in Kurram isn't about land. It's about belonging, it's about religious beliefs, it's about the stories that connect people to their soil and the struggles that define their history. Resolving these disputes won't be easy. It'll take dialogue, trust, and a lot of patience. If there is one thing I've learned here over the years, is that the people of Kurram are resilient, and if anyone can find a way forward, it is them. So by now, you know Kurram, a land so beautiful it takes your breath away, yet its history has been anything but serene. This valley, with its fertile soil and proud people, has been at the center of land disputes and sectarian clashes that have shaped lives and scarred generations. Now, with you on board in that understanding, let's back the layers to understand the roots of these conflicts, tracing them from local grievances to global entanglements and uncovering what has been happening here since 1986. Land disputes in Kurram aren't just about property lines, they are much more than that. For centuries, this valley has been home to Pashtun tribes, some Sunni, some Shia, living under a delicate balance of tribal traditions. Elders resolved disputes, grazing rights were respected, and the land, though contested, had its own kind of peace. The year 1986 marked a turning point. What started as a local land dispute spiraled into violent clashes between Sunni and Shia communities. It was a brutal conflict, with dozens killed and many more injured. This wasn't just about land anymore, and it has never been about land any longer. It became a sectarian flashpoint fueled by old resentments and new grudges. The government's slow response only deepened the wounds. Elders tried to mediate, but the scars left by 1986 would not fade quickly. The 1990s were a decade of uneasy quiet. The clashes of 1986 had taken their toll, and both Sunni and Shia communities worked hard to maintain a fragile peace. But underneath the surface, resentment brewed. The land disputes weren't resolved, the hatred didn't go away, they were just buried. And buried tensions have a way of erupting again. So they did in 1996 in again some terrible clashes. But that was a one-off incident during the 90s. Through all this time, Kurram, sitting right at the border with Afghanistan, remained a strategic conduit for the Mujahideen fighters and weapons, and then Taliban. Sunni militancy grew stronger, supported by Gulf funding and Taliban ideology, and Pakistan's ISI, of course. At the same time, the Iranian Revolution continued to ignite hope among Shia communities. Kurram's Shia majority, especially in Parachinar, felt a new sense of empowerment. But this ideological divide, Sunni militancy on one side and Shia resurgence on the other, turned Kurram into a battlefield for forces far beyond its borders. Then came the next decade, and the late 2000s brought the darkest days. In 2007, Kurram erupted again, with clashes escalated to unprecedented levels. Sunni tribes, bolstered by Taliban backing, laid siege to Parachinar, cutting off food and medical supplies for months. Hundreds were killed, entire villages were destroyed, and thousands were displaced. People couldn't leave their homes, there was no food, no medicine, even water was hard to find. People in Parachinar were trapped. It wasn't just a conflict, it was a humanitarian crisis, and for many here, it felt like the world had forgotten them. And then in 2017, tragedy struck again. A series of bombings targeted Shia communities in Parachinar, killing over 70 people during Ramadan. These attacks weren't just acts of violence, they were messages meant to terrorize the community already battered by decades of conflict. But the people of Kurram didn't stay silent. They protested, demanding protection and recognition. We are Pakistanis, they said. Why are we being treated like strangers in our own land? And then we had the recent incident when November 2024, a convoy was fired upon and innocent passengers commuting between Parachinar and Peshawar were killed. At least 4 dozens of them, including many women, a number of children, and one 6-month-old. So the history of clashes in Kurram is a history of pain, but also of perseverance. This land, with its beauty and its scars, stands as a testament to the strength of its people. They have survived wars, sieges, and bombings, and yet they still hope for justice, for reconciliation, and for a future where this valley is known not for its conflicts, but for its courage, for its beauty, for its splendor. So, Kurram, to an outsider, it may seem like just another valley caught in conflict, its headlines dominated by sectarian clashes, but those who live here, the story is far deeper, far more painful. This isn't just about land or tribes, it's about something bigger, something darker. It's about the systemic oppression of Shias not only here in Kurram but across this entire region. Let's now briefly peel back the layers of this hidden injustice. As you saw on the surface, the conflicts in Kurram seem rooted in land. Who owns what? Who controls which grazing field? Which farms? But let's not be fooled. These land disputes are the spark, not the fire. The fire comes from decades of sectarian divides that have been deepened and exploited by external forces and local power struggles. Kurram is unique in Pakistan. Parachinar, its heart is a Shia majority enclave in a predominantly Sunni country. For centuries, Sunni and Shia communities here coexisted, sharing markets, festivals, and sometimes even land. With the rise of sectarian ideologies in the 20th century, this balance began to fracture. But let me tell you, it wasn't always this way. Elders in Parachinar still talk about the days when sect didn't matter. But as external forces began to meddle, militants from Afghanistan, Gulf-backed ideologies, and even state-level neglect, the divide grew. And for Shias in Kurram, this wasn't just about religious difference. It became about survival. So let's talk about what this systemic oppression looks like. It's not just in the clashes, it's in the blockades, it's in the opprobrium, it's in the bombings, the economic strangulation of entire communities. For years, Parachinar was cut from the rest of Pakistan by Sunni tribal blockades. Food and medicine couldn't get through. Families starved, patients died, and all this while the state looked the other way. Remember, we just talked about the bombings in 2017. Over 70 Shias died in a single attack during Ramadan. And when the community protested, demanding justice, what happened? Security forces opened fire on the protesters. Imagine mourning your dead and then being punished for asking, why us? And it doesn't stop in Kurram. The operation reverberates across the region. In 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿, Kohat, 𝐸𝐸, and other surrounding areas, Shia communities face targeted killings, forced displacement, and economic marginalization. In 2012, a bombing during Ashura in Diai killed dozens. The message was clear: Shias are not safe anywhere. People left their homes because there was no other choice. Their relatives, their families were killed. Some of them disappeared. And when they tried to return, they were told their land was no longer theirs. This isn't just about local grudges or misunderstanding. It's a pattern, a system. Shia communities are denied access to resources, their movements restricted, their voices silenced. And it's not just militants. It's neglect at every level, local, provincial, and even national. The world sees the people of Parachinar as part of Pakistan, but often, very often, they feel like outsiders in their own land. This isn't just a story about one community. When any group is oppressed, whether for their religion, ethnicity, or beliefs, it tears at the fabric of society. Kurram is a microcosm of what happens when divisions are allowed to fester, when justice is denied, and when people are reduced to labels instead of being seen as human beings. But here is the thing about Kurram: it's also a land of resilience. The people here have endured unimaginable hardships, but they haven't lost their will to fight for justice. That justice doesn't just mean resolving land disputes, it means recognizing the systemic oppression, holding those responsible accountable, and creating a future where Shia, Sunnis, and everyone else can live as equals. The story of Kurram isn't over. This valley, scarred by decades of violence, still has hope, but that hope depends on all of us, on amplifying these voices, on demanding justice, and on building a future where oppression in any form has no place. Because this isn't just about land. This isn't just about a sect. It's about people. It's about humanity. Kurram, 𝐦𝐤𝐤𝐿, 𝐻𝐸, 𝐸𝐸. These are the names etched not merely into the map of Pakistan, but also into the hearts of its Shia communities, etched with stories of resilience, loss, and untold struggles. And the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 turned Kurram and its neighboring regions into a transit point for Afghan Mujahideen fighters. That influx brought something else. Radical Sunni ideologies, Kurram with its Shia majority in Parachinar becoming a natural target. With the US invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, the tribal belt, including 𝐸𝐤𝐤 and Kurram, became a safe haven for fleeing Taliban fighters. Their arrival brought a new wave of radical Sunni ideologies that had been subsiding for a while, and the Shia communities bore the brunt of it. In 𝐸𝐤𝐤, Shia villages were attacked, forcing about 35,000 people to flee. By 2008, entire Shia communities in the region had been displaced, their homes burned, and their land seized. In Kurram, the violence reached its peak between 2007 and 2011. As we saw, Sunni tribes supported by militants imposed a blockade on Parachinar, cutting off food, medicine, and essential supplies. For months, for years, families lived under siege, burying their dead while the world and Pakistan remained silent. They couldn't even bury their dead without fear. Their children went to bed hungry while they prayed for the siege to end. During this time, sectarian clashes continued to rage and claimed hundreds of lives. It was a humanitarian crisis, yet little was done to address the root causes or provide relief. In 𝐸𝐸, Shia doctors, lawyers, and community leaders were assassinated with chilling regularity. In 2012, a bombing during an Ashura procession killed dozens, sending shock waves across the country. In 𝐦𝐤𝐤 and 𝐸𝐤𝐤, the story was the same. Shia villages were raided, their residents displaced, markets became targets with bombs ripping through communities during Muharram processions. Each attack carried the same message: "You are not safe here." The history of Shia oppression in Kurram and beyond isn't just a story of violence. It's a story of neglect, of marginalization, and of survival against the odds. This isn't just a sectarian issue or a regional issue, it's a moral issue. Until justice is served and equality is guaranteed, the wounds of this history will continue to bleed. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it. We can amplify these voices, demand accountability, and work toward a future where every community, Sunni, Shia, or otherwise, has the right to live with dignity and peace. Imagine living in a valley so breathtaking that it feels like paradise, but also so isolated that it becomes a prison. This is Parachinar, a town that has faced not just war and conflict, but something even more insidious. As we discussed, a blockade that cut it off from the rest of Pakistan. Now let's dive deep into the history of this blockade and the unimagined suffering it inflicted on the people of Parachinar. In the beginning of blockade is 2007 when tensions in Kurram exploded into full-blown violence. Sunni tribes, emboldened by support from militants, imposed a blockade on Parachinar. The Parachinar road was sealed off and suddenly a town of hundreds of thousands was cut off from food, medicine and the outside world. For the people of Parachinar, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a life or death situation. Imagine needing emergency medical care, only to find that the nearest hospital was unreachable because the road was blocked. Imagine running out of food for your children knowing there was no way to bring in supplies. The blockade created a humanitarian crisis. Prices of basic necessities skyrocketed. Flour, sugar, rice, things you and I take for granted, became luxuries. Families rationed food, often going hungry for days. Children were the hardest hit with malnutrition and preventable diseases claiming lives. Even if someone is smuggled in supplies, the cost was so high. They cost 10 times the normal price. People were dying not from bullets but from hunger. And it wasn't just hunger. The blockade wasn't just a physical barrier, it was psychological warfare. Parachinar became a town under siege. Every trip outside the valley was a gamble with your life. Militants ambushed convoys, attacked travelers, and left bodies as warning. It was as if people of Parachinar were being punished for existing. In 2011, the blockade had entered its fifth year and the suffering was unbearable. Hundreds had died, some from starvation, others from attacks while trying to escape the valley. Parachinar's Shia community begged for help, but their cries often fell on deaf ears. The state's response was either too slow or non-existent. The people of Parachinar took to the streets not just in Kurram but in major cities like Islamabad and Karachi. Their message was clear: we are Pakistanis too. Why are we being abandoned? But nobody cared. Finally, in 2011, after years of suffering, the military finally stepped in to reopen the Tal-Parachinar road. Convoys escorted supply trucks into the valley, and for the first time in years, Parachinar breathed a sigh of relief. But this was no victory, it was merely survival. The damage had already been done. Entire families had been displaced, businesses destroyed, and trust in the state eroded. For the people of Parachinar, the question wasn't why did this happen, but why did it take so long for anyone to care? Even today, the Tal-Parachinar road remains a symbol of vulnerability. Every time there is a flare-up in violence, as we witnessed a few days ago, the people of Parachinar wonder, will we be cut off again? And often they are. So the legacy of those lost years continues to haunt families who suffered through them. And the story of Parachinar's blockade isn't just about one town. It's a story about neglect, about systemic oppression, and about what happens when a community is abandoned by those meant to protect it. It's a reminder that isolation isn't just a physical reality, it's a political one too. The blockade of Parachinar wasn't just a road closure. It was a humanitarian disaster. It was a lesson in the cost of indifference and the resilience of a people who refused to give up. But resilience shouldn't be the only answer. Justice, accountability, and equal treatment, these are what the people of Parachinar deserve. Then in recent years, a new chapter was added to their story, one that has brought renewed fear and instability to the region. We are talking about the controversial repatriation of TTP fighters under General Faiz Hamid and the PTI government, and how it threw an already volatile region deeper into chaos. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, is a militant group responsible for some of the deadliest attacks in Pakistan's history. From the 2014 Peshawar school massacre to relentless bombings in tribal areas, their reign of terror left scars across the country. When military operations like 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞 and Radd al-Fasad pushed them into Afghanistan, many Pakistanis breathed a sigh of relief. But in 2021, things took a sharp turn. In 2021, after the leadership of General Faiz Hamid and with the backing of the PTI government, the decision was made to allow thousands of TTP fighters and their families to return to Pakistan. The official reasoning? Peace. The argument was that reintegrating these militants into society would end violence and bring stability into the tribal belt. But what actually happened? Well, it didn't quite go as planned. The repatriation of TTP fighters didn't lead to peace, it led to chaos. These fighters returned not as repentant individuals but as empowered militants. They reclaimed control of areas in the tribal belt, enforcing the extremist ideologies and reigniting conflicts that had long been dormant. In Kurram, the situation became particularly dire. Sunni militant groups, already emboldened by external support, found new allies among the returning TTP. For Shia communities in Parachinar and beyond, it was like reopening an old wound and pouring salt into it. For the Shia community in Kurram, the return of these fighters was nothing short of a nightmare. Already marginalized and targeted for decades, they now faced renewed threats. The TTP, renowned for its anti-Shia stance, began to strengthen its presence in the region, using fear and violence to assert control. The people of Parachinar must have thought the worst was behind them. Then they saw the same faces they had prayed they would never see again. They came back stronger, and people of Parachinar were left helpless. Attacks on Shias increased, targeted killings resumed, and the fear that had begun to fade after years of military operations returned with a vengeance. But why was this decision made in the first place? Critics argue that it wasn't about peace, it was about political expediency. By repatriating the TTP, the PTI government and military leadership sought to broker a quick solution to tribal unrest. By doing so, they underestimated or ignored the consequences for vulnerable communities. So the reality is that the repatriation policy didn't just fail, it backfired. Instead of reintegration, it led to rearmament. Instead of peace, it reignited old flames. And the people who paid the price, the civilians of the tribal belt. This decision to repatriate TTP's fighters wasn't just a misstep, it was a gamble with people's lives. It showed a disregard for the lessons of the past and for the communities that have borne the brunt of conflict. Kurram, 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐤, 𝐾 tribal belts, these are not just names on a map. They are homes, histories, and futures, all put at risk by a policy that prioritized quick fixes over real solutions. But that's what we do in Pakistan. We're always choosing quick fixes over real solutions. It's easy to blame militants for the violence. But what about the decision that brought them back? What about the leaders who allowed this to happen? Accountability isn't just a word, it's a necessity. Without it, we risk repeating the same mistakes, and the people of Kurram and beyond will continue to pay the price. This isn't just a story about policies or politics, it's about people. People who deserve peace, safety, and a future free from fear. and it's up to us to demand better for them. Kurram, a place where the mountains echo with the stories of struggle and resilience. For decades, scarred by conflict, sectarian divides, and systemic oppression. But the question we will ask at the end of this video, what now? What now? How do we move forward? Let's look at what can be done to not just ease the tensions but resolve the dispute on a sustainable basis, once and for all. Here is a 7-step solution. Number 1, step 1, recognize the root causes. Before we can fix the problem, we need to understand it. The issues in Kurram aren't just about land, as people so often say or assume. They are about identity, belonging, and a history of systemic neglect. The first step toward resolution is for all stakeholders, the government, the military, and the local leaders, to acknowledge this reality. You can't treat a wound if you don't see it for what it is. Step 2, establish trust through inclusive dialogue. One of the biggest barriers to peace in Kurram is the lack of trust. Shia and Sunni communities have lived side by side for centuries, but decades of violence had created deep mistrust. What is needed is a forum where both sides can come together, not just to talk, but to truly listen. People don't want more promises, they want action. They want their grievances to be heard, and they want solutions that work for everyone. So the dialogue can't just be symbolic. That hasn't worked. It must be meaningful, inclusive, and backed by a commitment to act on the outcomes. Step 3 is to resolve land disputes through transparent processes. Land is at the heart of many conflicts in Kurram. To resolve these disputes, we need a transparent and impartial system, one that respects tribal traditions but also incorporates modern legal frameworks. This means appointing unbiased commissions, mediators trusted by all parties, and ensuring that decisions are not only fair but seen to be fair. Luckily, reliable land records exist in Kurram Agency, which is rare for the tribal region Pakistan. What is important is that these resolutions must be binding, and the state has to make sure that they are binding. Too often agreements are reached but not enforced, leaving room for the same conflicts to simmer and then to reignite. Step 4 is strengthen security and dismantle militant networks. Let's be clear, sustainable peace isn't possible if militant groups continue to operate freely. The government must take decisive action to dismantle these networks, whether they are in Kurram or 𝐥𝐤 or across the border in Afghanistan. At the same time, local communities need and deserve better protection. That means more security checkpoints, quicker response times, and better coordination with tribal leaders. Step 5, invest in the region's development. Peace isn't just about ending violence, it's about creating opportunities. Kurram and its neighboring regions have been neglected for far too long. They have good education standards and instincts, but the government has to do its bit. To build a sustainable future, the government must invest in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Roads, schools, hospitals, these aren't just services, they are lifelines. Children are educated, they will have a future beyond conflict. Many of them will grow up to be peacemakers, not fighters. In these areas, education is the most powerful tool we have to break the cycle of violence. It's time we used it. Step 6, address sectarian divides head on. We can't talk about peace in this region without addressing the sectarian divide. This means fostering interfaith and intersect dialogue, not just at the grassroots level but among religious leaders. When mullahs, imams, and scholars come together to promote unity, it sends a powerful message in a tribal area. It teaches tribes that faith can be a bridge not a barrier. It makes them think that we are all Muslims. Our differences should not divide us, they should enrich us. Dialogue, interaction, intermingling is the key. When we talk, we meet, we realize we are more alike than different. Step 7, and the last one, is to hold leaders accountable. Accountability is non-negotiable. The government, military, local administration, and local leaders must answer for their actions or their inaction. Policies like the repatriation of TTP fighters have had devastating consequences. Without accountability, how can the people of Kurram trust that their leaders have their best interests at heart? It requires transparency, it requires responsibility, it requires for the leadership to clearly manifest that they prioritize peace over politics. Kurram and its people deserve better. They deserve a future where children can play without fear, where families can travel without danger, and where communities, Sunni and Shia, can live as neighbors, not enemies. Achieving this won't be easy, but it is possible. And it starts with recognizing that peace isn't just about the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice, opportunity, and trust. So what can we do? We can amplify these voices, demand accountability, and support initiatives that build bridges instead of walls. Because the people of Kurram aren't just survivors, they are the architects of a brighter future. They are the litmus test of a brighter future for Pakistan. Let's stand with them.